Ladies and gentlemen, neighbors and friends, how y'all doing?
Good.
The good rains of Irene fell this week. The wind shrieked and howled, oceans of rain, winds rattled and doors threatened to bust on open. Debris swept through the street, houses and cars carried away by the flood. Radio, television inundated all of us with news of the impending apocalypse. As the good rain fell. The good rain fell, not gentle nor kind, not in tenderness or goodness, but in the telling of the tale. Rain swept aside fences, washed over stone walls. Rivalries, jealousies, old arguments, feuds, misunderstandings, all of that washed away as the good rain fell. Electricity was out for days. Houses, homes torn away from their foundations. But neighbors and strangers came together. All of our homes opened for the displaced. And we shared meals by candlelight. Musicians played at the Red Cross. 1,000 acts and more of kindness, before, during, and ongoing through the storm. As the good rain fell, and the good rain fell. And this so much defines to me is about Vermont, about neighbors coming together. And as I often like to remind people, and I think most people know that, in Vermont, there are no strangers, only friends you ain't yet met. And so this is part of the story about me falling in love with Vermont in the 6 seasons that we do. I'll tell you later what the 6 seasons are, if you don't know them already. So welcome tonight, and we begin this. This is a story of my home on Blue Heron Pond. And somebody asked me and they said, well, I know the other 270 towns in Vermont, but exactly where is Blue Heron Pond? And I explains to them, well, it's somewhere between Guilford, Brattleboro, and Brigadoon. My home. Welcome. Let us walk by these shores and these sacred woods. In these stories and poems, I've spoken of life around the pond, the foxes, beavers, deer, and every so often the black bears who amble down from the hills, the dozens of birds who make their home here, even in their slumbering winter dreams. This is the microcosm of heaven. Water, life, abundance, peace. The serenity of the pond from season to season is the great joy that fills my spirit. It is the simple meditation of waking up each day by Blue Heron Pond, and some days I don't even write or play music. I just sit here watching the pond unfold and being astonished. These poems and stories are a window to the sublime joy when imagination and reality blend. And voila, the monk, Lee Pond, and the nuns make their appearance here on Blue Heron Pond. And by the way, he told me that he is glad you are part of his imagination. I grieve for the violence and pain on the planet and offer these poems as love songs, prayers for peace and healing on the planet, and may the blessing of Blue Heron Pond, like a prayer for peace, spread out across the globe. Here, sanity, peace, calm. This is the prayer for Gaia, great Mother Earth, who has given us heaven. And the blue heron that graces these waters, she is the spirit guide who blesses our journey. We are caretakers of this sacred garden. We, come, let us walk by the shores of Blue Heron Pond. Now this value of worth always comes back to me. Surrounded by a dense forest of towering hemlocks to the west, birch and maple trees to the west, and there, by the pond's edge, an oak stands that had been burnt by lightning. When I first came back home to Vermont from New York City, I was out of breath, exhausted, and I walked down the hills here with the real estate agent, and I looked at all of this land as if $1 or $1 million could buy any of it. And an abandoned beaver's house was right there by the far edge of the pond. And then, as if on a homing beacon, this blue heron came from the north, almost as if it was on a beacon. And she glided down to the waters as sunlight sparkled on the water. And then she landed atop the beaver's house. And she turned to look at me, not in an idle scan of her surrounding, but a look that seemed to weigh and measure my worth of being her neighbor here on Blue Heron Pond. Boy, this is gonna make all of your dreams come true. And I thought, are you really? He said, this is Fat City, you never need to work again. I'm gonna make you an offer for this land. And I said, is that so? He said, yeah, but what will happen to my home and this land? And he laughed, a jiggling, juggling kind of laugh, and he said, rip down that old shack. The future is condominiums. And the words easily rolled off his tongue. He must have seen the fear in my eyes, but he said, we would make it classy to optimize the aesthetic value. And I said, what the hell does that mean, optimize the aesthetic value? He said, it means lots of greenbacks, boy. Lots of greenbacks. And I looked out to these fields and pastures, this tiny corner of heaven, the way the sunlight mirrors the pond, the hundreds of birds that are singing here in every part of the day. And as each one of us knows, as we watch the course of the miracle of autumn, I see it all on Blue Heron Pond. And I said, no. And he said, double, double. And I looked at him and I shook my head and I said, more worth and value to this land than you can even begin to measure or imagine. The worth. We're entering this next phase of the final moments of summer and the sure movement forward to autumn. I don't know if any of you are, but I am a complete autumn junkie. I can't do anything, and I try to make sure that this time of year, I'm barely doing anything but just watching the leaves and the colors and the trees, and I feel my mind and imagination are opening wide. But this is a homage to last summer that wasn't quite sure if it was really going to come. It kept coming in fits and starts. So this poem, or this story, is about summer, and it's on the CD, Eternal Summer. High summer in Vermont. Trees are a collage of leaves in a thicket of green as far as the eye can see. Hundreds of trees are in my sight. Stout, plump firs, shaggy hemlocks, virile oaks, and maples dreaming of flaunting their flaming red and orange leaves. Tiger lilies, voluptuous and orange, red bee balm invites the hummingbird, purple coneflowers, succulent yellow coltsfoot, and lavender irises are my summer's bouquet. Tell me, have you ever listened to the sleeping dreams of a maple tree on a full moonlit night, then snuggle close while you sleep, one ear to the ground, and hear the roots' restive dreams of reaching heaven? My church is these green mountain woods, these woods that surround us, towering oaks that keep alive every memory of life since the beginning of time, generation to generation. By the green murky pond, a bower of willows leans together, and their supple tendril fingers form like a prayer. And when I part the cattails, the squishy ooze draws me down, down into the earth, but I float back. What happened to the slide? Now is the part you have to imagine. I float back on the waters, adrift as I watch the pearlescent clouds and the pale indigo sky part wide. I'm a seed floating inconsequentially on the water, more thoroughly anointed than even John the Baptist could aspire to. We are blessed in our love and our loving for the land. Eternal summer. Most people say, Namaya, it's kind of strange, as about 2/3 of your slides are about autumn. It's part of the autumn junkie thing. And right now, as I'm just about to turn 57 and pushing hard on 60, I'm celebrating each moment of autumn even more. I hope you are too. There's a monk by the name of Li Pan who lives by my pond's edge, but I talked to my wife and she said she's never seen him. Maybe he might be imaginary, but I don't think so. So one day, I see Li ice skating around the pond. Big figure eights, he's swirling. Yellow monk's robes are like a brilliant flower right there on the pond. Only problem is, it's a warm day in December and not a trace of ice. I call out, I say, Lee, there's no ice on the pond. He seems to look at me, but I wave to him from then, but then I see him moving in a pirouette, skating long to either side of the pond, and he looks up and says, no ice? Well, at that moment I thought he was gonna plunge down, but instead he comes again for a long leaping swirl, and then in a triple pirouette, or an axis that you do with ice skating, I imagine, I see him leaping up off the pond and up through the trees. And he looks back to me and said, don't be so attached to reality. Li Pan is a good teacher. So in that moment, you can kind of imagine and see Li Pan dancing on the pond. Yeah. Li Pan, elegant calligrapher monk, reaches forward with his fingers and writes on the heavens, and suddenly the clouds line up. All the clouds from here and there suddenly form into a letter. L-O-V-E. Yes, I swear that this is what I saw the other day. I saw Li Pan with his fingers, his will, his imagination taking the clouds and writing like a skywriter, love is love, and love is love suddenly spun across the globe like a blessing. Love is love. Maybe I spend too much time on the pond, but I don't think so. Li Pan one day with the other monks was making a terrible noise, and I usually like to write in the morning. I said, Li, be quiet. I am writing. And Li continued, and I walked down by the pond, and I said, Li, I imagined you, and as I imagined you, I can unimagine you. And he said, poet, is that so? I said, yes. And in that moment, I felt the leaves shifting, the cold wind blowing, and felt myself turning, falling back in the years to when I was a child. As a young man, further back in time, looking at the face of my mother, and then further back in birth as a drop of water on the pond, and I saw myself looking to heaven, and then I heard Li Pan say, now poet, imagine that, disappearing back in time with the monk Li Pan. Fire inspires memory. Do you remember that full moon in late August, how she filled the sky with fire and then kissed the waters with her passion and incited the night's chorus to an orgiastic reverie? I remember well that moon on that late night and making love with you as if time itself had paused and we were on an island, spun from our private, tender loving. How does the reverie of sun hold through the night? How does the enchantment of night hold us fast to loving? Fire inspires memory. Fire inspires memory. May I tell you about my neighbor, Josiah? I think we all have a neighbor like Josiah, 10 generations of Vermonters. Josiah looks at me and spits down a stream of chewed tobacco and says, you know, I can take that piss puddle of a pond and make it into a proper Vermont pond. Is that so, Josiah? I said. He looks at me, nods, and unbeknownst, I said, yup. Well, unfortunately, I hadn't been back home in Vermont in a while, and I had kind of forgot the peculiar lexicographical definition of yup. Now, yup in some ways could mean, yeah, I hear you, but I'm going to ignore you, you dumb SOB. Or it could mean, yeah, I hear you, I understand you, and maybe I'll do it somewhere in the next year. Or, yeah, I hear you, but I'm going to pretend that I didn't. So this brings us back. So I said yup, and unbeknownst on the following day, about 4:30 in the morning, I heard the most hellacious of sounds coming up the driveway. I thought Vermont Yankee had finally blown its top. I thought that the whole area was going to be laid flat, and instead it's Josiah. He's sitting up there with an excavator. He's got on his John Deere hat. He's pulling on the levers. It's the biggest damn excavator I've ever seen in these parts. And then he goes down the hillside, down like some prehistoric monster, rolling, trees snapping back, the earth trembling. And he comes to the pond, scoopful by scoopful, and he begins to dredge the pond. Well, I guess that would be okay, except the rains fell. Not just your 1 day of rain, not just your 2 days of rain. This was a biblical sort of rain, a Irene times 2. And in fact, it got so bad by the 5th day, I was expecting Noah to come knocking at my door and asking for 2 volunteers. But not. I was cool. I waited. And then that excavator, suddenly, just like a small little bit of its tiny head was peering above the pond's water. Josiah looked at me and spit and said, "Don't you none worry about that. Everything will be just fine." Now, I don't know if any of you ever have any trouble understanding some of your neighbors, and not that I'm making fun of anybody, but you see Josiah, he's 10 generations of Vermonter, and English was not his first language. No, sir, indeed. It was pure Vermont, as thick as the first run of maple syrup, with a peculiar twang just over the Guilford line. But over the years, I know that a few trees had fallen on his head, plus he only had 1 tooth left, and it made it a bit hard to understand him. So I think I went over to his wife, and I said, "Mabel, do you have any trouble understanding Josiah?" And she stopped for a minute. She's a beautiful butterball of a Vermont farm wife, and she said, "Well, nope. As far as I can tell, he ain't said anything in years." I said, "Is that so?" She said, "Yeah. He mumbles in the morning, and I put food in front of him, and then he stops mumbling. Same thing that happens in the afternoon. He mumbles real loud and grumbling. You wives know what that's all about. And then he's quiet again." Yes, he is. And then on Sunday after we go to church, and he's grumbling and mumbling real loud, I give him some loving. And then me and the girls go to the racetrack because he's fast asleep for the rest of the day. Which brings us back to my poem. You remember where we were? Good, because now Josiah, on that following morning when the sun came up, because one thing is certain in Vermont, if you wait for more than 5 minutes, the weather will change. And it did. That following morning, close to 4:30, the excavator came in. This wasn't just your tiny little piss puddle of an excavator. No, sir, indeed. This one was the most monstrous I've ever seen in New England. It towered above the trees. It threatened to knock out the power lines. Yes, it did. Josiah's up there again, on the levers, pulling and yanking back. "Get up there, you sons of bitch!" And he's riding that thing like it's some wild brontosaurus. Damn. I had to go back to sleep. I couldn't take that much excitement. Well, he starts digging. 1 day, 2 days, whoosh, chomp, chomp, more of the pond is disappearing, and soon it's the biggest goddamn pond I've ever seen. I couldn't believe this. Well, then Josiah, at the end of the day, I find him sitting on my porch, and he's looking as proud and as cocky as a rooster. He has a corncob pipe in his mouth, and he spits out a stream of chew tobacco. He said, "That there is one fine son of a bitch of a Zen pond." I looked at this pond that now stretched for 1 mile one way, a half a mile another, and I swear it was the biggest damn pond in all of southern Vermont, maybe even north too. I said, "Josiah, I didn't ask you to make this into goddamn Lake Como." He looked at me and said, "Lake Como? That there up by Montpelier?" I said, "No, Josiah." He looked as if his feelings were hurt. And then he opened up a book. He showed me this book. It was of Japanese monasteries. And he showed me a picture of a pond with a rock. He said, "That there what I did. I put that rock there in the middle of your goddamn pond, I did." "Yeah, I did." "It makes you want to come back as a goddamn frog in your next life, Tonin. That there thing is a Zen pond." And he was so proud of himself and laughed till he almost choked. I said, "Josiah, don't you mean a Zen pond?" He said, "Yeah, that there what I say, a Zen pond." And I looked out at the birds, the pond, the beautiful serenity of the biggest damn pond any of us has ever seen. And I spit. And I said, "You're right, Josiah, that there is one fine son of a bitch of a Zen pond." Josiah said to me, "If you're going to tell stories about me, I want to tell a story about you." And I said, "What you mean, Josiah?" He said, "You're going around and telling all these stories, so this is one I told about you." And I said, "Which one do you have in mind?" And he looked at me and said, "Do you remember the other day in the garage?" And I shook my head and I said, "Not that one, Josiah." And he said, "Yeah." So this is Josiah's story about me. You know that poet fellow? He's a bit peculiar, as poet fellows are. Yeah, he is. Well, one morning I'm there about 7 o'clock in the morning, and he's in the back of the garage, and he's talking to himself. Well, that ain't particularly peculiar, because those poet fellows tend to talk to themselves. It's part of what they do. But he's talking on one of those cell phones, I see. Are you with me so far? So the poet, at 7 o'clock in the morning, is talking to the back wall of the garage with a phone that's in his ear. I think so. Well, I tell you, peculiar things just seem to happen around that boy. Yes, sir, indeed. Not only was he there talking, he was naked, wearing cowboy boots. So if you can imagine the poet fellow, naked, cowboy boots, and talking on a cell phone. And the poet fellow turned and looked at me and tried to explain something about an electrician or whatever, and I just nodded my head, and I simply said to him, "Yep, I sure understand." So the next time that the poet fellow is telling you stories about me, Josiah, I want you to remember that one about him. Let me tell you about the really towering mountains just near the Guilford line. But some of you haven't seen it. You haven't been quite paying attention to that monstrous mountain, because one of my neighbors lives right by there. And if you will imagine this, he's an old Vermont dairy farmer. His name is Joe, and he's sitting in his wheelchair, and he has a tall tumbler of wild turkey, and he's slugging it back, and he's watching a black and white television. Now, some of you who are under 50 may not remember what a black and white television it was, but that's the reason why our minds are a little fucked up. But maybe George Bush, I won't go there. So, brings us back to old Farmer Joe. Old Farmer Joe was there, and he's watching that skiing fellow going there. And he gets himself an idea, and the wind is blowing. It's the January winds. They're hellacious winds that are threatening to sweep aside the house. But he looks at his skis, the skis from 1944, when he was in the 1st Army Division of the Vermont Mountaineers that invaded Europe. Those skis hadn't been touched in 60 years, but Joe decided, you know, it's gonna be death or glory. The years are getting near and nearer. If I'm gonna go, it's gonna be in a fit of glory. And so he took the skis off the rack there, put on his World War II Army helmet, and headed out the door. The wind blew and almost knocked him back. Well, he's trudging through the snow. Tum, 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 tum. He's ready to come up to the rocky edge and then ski down the tallest mountain this side of Guilford. Yes, he was. Well, the only problem is his wife was there. Now, his wife usually wore glasses. It don't matter much because she had thick Coke bottle glasses and she couldn't see particularly well, but she saw a shadow through the snow and saw the empty wheelchair and knew that Joe was leaving for the mountains. Yes, she did, and like all good Vermont farm wives, what'd she do? She grabbed her 12-gauge shotgun right above the door, popped in a couple of shells, and she leveled it. Now, I suppose this would be good. She tried to take good indication of the wind, the barometric pressure, the oscillation of the tides, and all the new age things that happen down here. But it didn't matter much because anybody who's ever fired a 12-gauge shotgun knows for sure it's imprecision. But that day, miracle of miracle, that shotgun blast blew. Now, she was to tell the police later on, I didn't mean to shoot the son of a bitch. I just wanted to get his attention. Yes, she did, and she got his attention in the most marvelous way, because as he was crouched down, he was ready to ski down the mountain, his body 1,000 achings of achiness, and then the avalanche began. Whoo! He looked behind him. It was death. Chomp! Chomp! It was ready to devour him, not in one piece, not in two pieces, but it was going to deliver him to paradise in 12 pieces or more, and with one body skiing almost the geometry of physics, time and space defined. If you can imagine him, one ski, two skis, he looked like a marionette akimbo as the avalanche gained, and suddenly death appeared. He looked up, and he said, Death, I've been here 91 years. I ain't going for you. And down he flew, down the mountain, down into a ravine like a Shelby Mustang in 5th gear, and he flew. Well, you might say, how did I know this? My neighbor Josiah was watching this, and he said, you know, it was a funny thing. I was watching Joe come down the mountain, and he was doing fine. I've never seen anybody that old skiing on one ski. But worse than that, he had on an army helmet, he had on skis, and a jacket, but he forgot to put on his pants. So folks, if you can imagine, a half-naked Vermont dairy farmer skiing down the side of a mountain on one ski, the other ski akimbo in the air, and up, up he flew. And a miracle of things that happen here in southern Vermont. He landed on the front doorstep of his house, embedded in a bank of snow, one ski impaled on the door. Yes. And there was his wife. She leaned over And she said, "What took you so damn long to get off the mountain?" "Yes, you did." Well, that evening, Joe was back in his chair. Yes, he was. A tall tumbler of wild turkey beside him. And then he was watching the snow. He said, "Death or glory? Yes." We've been doing about 9 shows around Vermont, I think. Burlington, Manchester, Montpelier, etc. Places east and west. And we planned the show over a year ago, and then the CD and the book go back 5-6 years into both the book, God, Sex, Politics, and the current book, Vermont, My Home, and the CD. And what I've seen as I've been traveling around Vermont and talking with people, shooting photographs, and doing benefits for United County, Chittenden, Green Mountain United Way, Woodstock, Sustainable Project, is the tremendous strength and resilience of Vermonters. And as you go back through the history of Vermont, what you see is a very independent-minded folk. We may be one of the most independent-minded states. And so part of the story I talk about in Vermont is we've always been kind of a poor state, a hard scrabble state, and this is what this next piece talks about. But the thing that I try to talk with folks around Vermont, and as we engage in conversations, is we have a tremendous sense of community. We've always kind of hung together. And through whatever the course and the turn of events, and I tell people it's not necessarily what happens in Washington or the events outside. What really matters is how as a community, in our acts of kindness, as we've seen in the Hurricane Irene, our acts of kindness, our courage, our compassion, and how we hang together. And I think this is something that really defines Vermont for me, is how the characters and the land and the beauty of this landscape come together. And it's a pretty special place, Vermont. As I always say, it's a corner of heaven. Even on a bad day, it's pretty wonderful. Out on the back roads of Guilford, just up the road, heading towards Vernon, is the family farm. It looks like it's been quiet for a number of years, but as you drive closer, there isn't a cow or horse in the field. It's been abandoned now for a few years. The fields and pastures that stretch from horizon to horizon were cleared, foot by foot over many, many years, by teams of horses and men. Forest, fields, stone boulders, stumps, trees leveled out as best as possible, enough for hay fields and cows to graze. Not one of those flat as an iron Iowa farms. No, sir, indeed. Vermont farms, especially the dairy farms, grew up on the sparse, granite-filled fields that reluctantly offered a harvest. The work wasn't just hard. It was unrelenting, brutal work. From the heat of the summer, where the inside of the steaming barns would knock you over from the smell, to the bitterly cold January night, where the temperature went even register. And Grandpa, who never complained or spoke much, finally said, "Yup, cold tonight." But at 4 a.m., he was ready to head to the barn. It was like watching a sailor walk on a ship as he ambled out on arthritic hips and knees that could barely hold him. But I tell you this, he could still swing a milk pail as easily as a man decades younger. 365 days of the year, morning milking and evening without respite. This farm is a cycle of seasons unbroken back through time to when the earliest humans planted a seed in the ground or first milked a goat or a cow. When Grandpa passed away a few years ago, no one wanted to take over the farm. All the kids who grew up on it said, no, much too hard. And from a dollar and cents point of view, it don't make a lick of sense. I spent the afternoon walking around the pastures and the fields, by the hay cribs and the corn silos. The barn that still smelled like cows had been in there yesterday, and I saw the ghost of men and women who worked this land for more than 150 years. And a single cow, probably from a neighbor, was grazing on the upper pasture in a field of daisies. A big Holstein. She was ready to be milked, and she was framed against an azure blue sky. And she looked at me for a moment, as if I knew the fate of these farms and these fields. Yes, I do know the fate of these farms and fields. This farm endures. This farm endures. This is a cycle of seasons. As one generation comes, another returns. There will always be farms and fields. This is our legacy. This is our legacy, our future, our farms. Is about how do we support our farms. You know, if we want local economy, we can't necessarily buy the eggs for 70 cents down at Hannaford's. And part of it sometimes, even when the economy is tough, and I know people are struggling now, is paying a little bit more for the milk, the organic, from the Franklin farms, from the local growers, the CSAs. These are the kinds of things where we invest. It's not always about finding the cheapest at Walmart, but I think a reminder for all of us, and myself included. Sometimes we say, it's much cheaper if I go there, and a part of it is, where am I investing? How am I putting my dollars to work? What is the value of my concern about home in Vermont? October blows in with its blustery, tempting hints of yellow, invitations of gold and red. All reminders. You remember all the things you're still supposed to do. Yeah, gather wood, clean the furnace and stove, turn off the outside faucets, mend the roof, patch and seal the cracks, store extra water and food, new candles, stock up on kerosene lamp oil, the 100 score things that still need to be done. But the task, most important of all, is to hold every ounce of the full summer sun as it warms the core of my being. Harvest. Pumpkin season sky unfurls like a clean, fresh sheet. Palest of blue, single song note of a flute. Attention riveted by the leaf burnt, apple ripe, tart sensation of the wind. What whispered voice, memory of fire, compels the virile, succulent green to surrender? What wind-spun incantation invites the fall, shouts down the fortress, sheltering green? Why has the roots-driven thirst for the sun surrendered to the shivering, naked limbs? And why does the pumpkin season sky bleed into the sullen-leafed earth? And how is the moon spoken to your ancient soul? Harvest. the well-trod path. I spent my life taking the path least familiar and less traveled on 5 continents, but a path to me that is best cherished is the well-trod one that leads through the woods to my neighbor's house, about 100 yards or more, whether in the summer or any season. The path winds through the woods to the back door. I generally don't knock, but give a shout and a call out, "Hello!" And most times it's, "Come on in." Yeah. A glass of water or wine is offered, and if it's around dinner time, an extra plate of food appears. If a tool is needed, I just go to their shed. It could be mine, it could be theirs. It's there, always, for the asking, just for the taking. The well-trod path through the woods, so familiar and known that even in a pitch-black night, I can find my way to my neighbor's door. It's a well-trod path. Yeah. This was one of my first poems about Brattleboro. And I almost didn't include it, but I started to think about the complexity of Brattleboro and all the things that make it happen. It's not just the happy, fun, Trustafarian, joyful life. It's the hard things about Vermont. And even now, as we find that 10% of Vermonters are still living in poverty, over 70,000. These are the hard truths of it. You know, and as the floods washed away, the hard truth is not just so much as about the great and the wonderful community. The hard truth is that many of those people should not have been living in poor, rundown trailers, living on substandard land. But that's where, if you're poor, you live. And so the question is how do we do better? How do we do better? Our town, quaint, charming, bucolic, New England green towns. Yes, we take the motley crew that life presents. The crazed, the nearly crazed, the wannabe intellectuals, the PhD handyman, and just the ordinary Jim and Jane, the mom and pop twos. Why, we're like some French Foreign Legion outpost, where the past is a well-kept secret, and identities are forged and remade every day. Pirates, thieves, drug runners, and potential saints crowd these narrow New England streets. Ecstasy and LSD trippers are on a common ground, trying to reclaim a taste of life that was never, never as good. Quaint, charming, bucolic, that at times feels like heaven, but heaven is heaven because there is hell. Heaven is hell. Wife beaters, child abusers, sadists and their lovers, and the saviors on the other side of the fence. The saints, the civic-minded, the powers that be, those who claim the higher ground, and those who know there ain't no such thing as the higher ground. We're just all swimming in this together. But if you're black, look behind you. There surely is a cop waiting. Call your lawyer. They'll think you're running a crack house. And if you're a cross-dresser, they let you run the fashion show at the antique mall. God bless you, Alfred. Native park, trailer park, debutante, land rich and broke, got a house but no money for taxes. Tenement houses, crack infested and colder than hell. The imported bourgeois rule the roost and say, spend, spend, spend. We're gonna make this town shine like a brand new penny. And taxes rise, and the poor bleed, and the poor bleed. Liberal, conservatives, dykes, fags, addicts, 12-steppers, nouveau riche Trustafarians, church-going racists, closet queens, Buddhists, papists, theists, holy rollers, hippies, vagrants, winos, glaze-eyed druggies, mendicants, kayakers, psychotics, and we even got yogis. God bless us. We're an all-American town on the edge of the new millennium. No wiser or stupider. Certainly not more enlightened, nobler, or grander. The same vanities, the same hopes, the same shallowness, the same greed, except, it is here in this lush New England green valley we call home. Wonderful story. A dear friend of mine, who's here in the audience, called me up, and I don't know if I remember the story. He was on a peace walk, and he was saying that he was at the peace walk, and one of my poems was there, which is 100 flowers. You see, let there be 100 hours, 100 flowers of peace that bloom in the garden. Let there be 100 hours of love for every moment of war. Let there be 100 acts of kindness for each instant of hate. Let there be 100 hours of love for each moment of war. Let there be 100 flowers of peace that bloom in the garden. This brings us back to bring the soldiers home. And this is a very difficult piece always for me to do. I wrote this a number of years ago. It is actually on the internet, and this was written for Vermont National Guard. And it was also written for Peace Corps. And as I started to doing this piece, I'm a Vietnam era veteran. I'm also a Quaker. And I became a Quaker at the end of my service in the Navy in the very early 1970s. And this is part of my journey over the past 40 years. I've worked with many veterans groups at the VA hospital and currently work with veterans. And most of my work right now is in for peace projects. That's why the B for Peace project in this first iteration is here with, you'll notice the boots, that's part of a larger project. And it's part of my witness as a person, as a veteran, and believing that our only mandate must be peace. And it's not because peace is cool and groovy, it's because we can't afford war. We're spending, can somebody give me the number for the current Pentagon budget?
$1.4 trillion.
That's good. That's total military spending.
Yes.
800 billion.
God, it's true in the audience that even gotten this. Actually, when I do this discussion around the United States and around New England, 99% of people cannot give me that number. Is that astonishing? That blows my mind. And to me, it's one of the most important numbers. And so as I'm coming back and how this happens to tie in with Vermont, Vermont has, as far as I know, one of the highest percentage of young men and women serving in the military. We have one of the highest, and we also have one of the highest fatalities per capita. And this is always difficult to come back and do. But what's really ironic is 3/4 of Vermonters, both 10 years ago and currently, have opposed being in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so where this ties into Vermont, when we have like a flood like this and that, our National Guard isn't here. I mean, we've gotten some help, but it's over in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so I say it's time to bring the soldiers home. And this is the way that I think that this needs to happen, is all of us, whether or not Democrat, Republican, Tea Party, Coffee Party, whatever our political persuasion is, there's a new persuasion. It's called a Vermonter. It's an American. As an Americans, we really need to consider how we're using, what are we leaving for the next generation. And I think it's absolutely vital that we need to consider this as Americans, as Vermonters, coming together as community, and it really is time to bring the soldiers home. Bring the soldiers back on home. Hear our words, hear our songs, hear our love, and hear our prayers. Bring the soldiers back on home. Bring the soldiers back on home. Bring them home, wives and family. Bring them home, husbands and children. Bring them home, sons and daughters. Bring them home to our loving arms. Know that we love you. Know that we miss you. Each and every moment of every day. Welcome home, family and friends. Safe at home. Safe at home in our loving arms. Safe at home to friends and kin. Bring the soldiers, bring them home. Bring them home here. Let's find a place for them back here in our communities. Bring soldiers back on home. Bring the soldiers back on home. Bring them home, husbands and children. Bring them home, sons and daughters. Bring them home to our loving arms. We hold you in our hearts. We hold you close in love to your home again in our loving arms. May the grace of God keep you safe. May the angels always protect you, and our love to guide you on home. Oh, bring the soldiers back on home. Let this prayer be on your lips. Let it be on all of our lips every moment of every day. Let it be, and let it be. Bring the soldiers back on home. Bring them home to wives and family. And now comes the hard task. Now comes the real hard task, because so many of the young men and women are coming back, is we don't have a place for them. And we need to find a place for these young men and women who have been so traumatized. 4 or 5 tours of duty in Iraq and Afghanistan. We need to rebuild this community here, Brattleboro. We need to rebuild our communities in Vermont. Instead of waging war over there, we need to be waging peace here. We need to care for our communities. Heron Pond, sacred body of water, has taught me more reverence than any church. Wiser in its quiet wisdom than any holy book or tome. Care well, it seems to say, care well. Swimming in the freezing waters, ice-cold springs surprise and awaken me. Finches, dots of yellow, race across the fields. Blue jays screech warns. Care well, care well. Frogs' nightly chorus more joyous and godly than any Bach chorale. Tulips, divine, the intersect of mystery, revelation from the earth and desire for the sun. Blue heron, sage of this pond, she nests high in the hemlocks, is patiently biding her time. Care well, she seems to say, care well. We will all leave this earth, but I will grieve if we have not loved this earth with sublime tenderness. Reverence the waters as dearly as our gods, cherished the wisdom of a flower, and held the divinity of each living creature as a mirror of God's love. As the gods, or God, spun the planet Earth on its course and brought it to life, she set it free with the single blessing, care well. Care well, care well. That is the blessing. Part of the work of what we do with Namaya Productions, the CDs, et cetera, supports community development projects, not only in Vermont, but with Grace Cares, is we have community development projects in the Dominican Republic, in Guatemala, India, where else?
It's all right.
That's all right now. But we had the privilege of one of our local heroes, and what we tend to do is find local heroes. And our project is in Baitoya, and we've been raising money for a school there. There's a school, if you can imagine, 150 high school students with a leaking roof. It's a tin roof and no walls. And so our local hero is working on putting in a bathroom, because there had been one outhouse for 150 students. And so if you go to gracecares.com, this is part of the work that with Zoe and my nephew Kenny and our other nieces and nephews are doing. One last fun story about this is about how each person can be inspired to be a hero in their own way, and that the thing is very inspiring to me, and seeing how various people, you know, find their own courage. My niece is, when she was 13 years old, and she had to do a community project for her bat mitzvah. So she decided that she would raise $1,500 by making and selling her own jewelry and raising the money for a chicken and a poultry project in the Dominican Republic. And she did. And so we took her down, and it was wonderful and inspiring to see this person. And now she's mobilized her entire class to go down to Dominican Republic and help. So for all of you, in whatever way you are, no matter, and I know that life is difficult and it's really challenging, but in whatever way you can, being your own local hero. And I think that this is the thing that is really special. We've seen it around here as we've been traveling around Vermont, as people just spontaneously have been helping and caring. I got the green, mountain green. I got the green, mountain green. It's hard to get blue. It's hard to get sad when you're living, when you're working, when you're playing, when you're living in the green, green mountain. Rivers and mountains, east to west, north to south. This place is the best. Champlain shores, autumn color, ablazing. This place, Vermont, our home, is amazing. Times are rough, but we got enough. We got enough. We got enough to get by. Neighbors and friends, welcome in. Come on in. Come on in. There's always a place for you. Always a place. There's always a place for you in Vermont. There are no strangers here, only friends you ain't yet met, because we're always in the green, green, mountain green. Got the green, mountain green. I've traveled all around the globe. I travel everywhere, but my feet and my soul always takes me back to these green, green mountains where my soul, my heart, and my spirit find peace in Vermont.